In the last video, we talked about the need for project governance to help realize the strategy of the organization. Now, there's a lot of research which does um, advocate the need for project governance, but there's a lot less guidance on what is project governance. And in particular, I believe, no research which proves that if you follow this governance standard or this governance standard, that you actually will realize the strategic benefits. The only research I'm aware of where project governance has some evidence is what I call 6Q governance. So this video is going to present to you 6Q governance. So we talked in the last video about what happens if you don't have effective project governance. The biggest crime is that the projects are not aligned to strategy and that the benefits are not realized and the business needs are not met. So we don't implement the strategy. That's the biggest problem with no project governance. But with no project governance, we also have the other symptoms of too many projects, not enough time, can't kill projects, over time, over budgets. So we need to have project governance in place. 6Q governance comes from some research done in the 2006 in this handbook published for boards and senior managers. It examined 6 case studies of projects that succeeded or failed in leading organizations in Australia. And the question was asked, what did top managers have to do to make sure the projects could have succeeded? And it turns out there are only 6 things you need to do to make sure the project succeeded. This 6Q governance approach has been written up more recently and published in 2001 by myself and my co-author Vedran Zerjav from UCL. And we call the book Project Benefit Realization and Project Management, the 6Q Governance Approach. How does it work? Well, you've seen this diagram before. The operations of an organization is IT plus business working together to deliver its processes on a reliable basis. But the current situation is probably not where you want to be in 3 to 5 years. So we need to have a vehicle to get from where we are now to where we want to be in the future. That's what projects are. So we have projects to try to deliver change, to try to realize benefits. And once we have the projects in place, we need to govern them. We need to, because the world does not stand still. We need to react to the environment as it changes on us. We need to make sure that we're on track to implementing our strategy. Now, governance is not plan, do, check, act. It sits at a much higher level. The standards talk about governance as being evaluating, directing, and monitoring. So what's 6Q governance? There are 6 questions. As soon as a project is proposed, somebody has a bright idea, the very first thing you should ask yourself is a strategy question. What are we actually trying to achieve? I hear you. I understand what you're trying to say. What are we trying to do? How does that align with our strategy? What benefits are trying to be realized? And it seems like such a simple question. It seems like you shouldn't have to ask this question. But it turns out that there's only a business case 67% of the time. And of these 67 business cases, we ask top managers, how often did you exaggerate the business case in order to get funding? And they go, ha. It turns out 27% of people admit to exaggerating, or shall we say lying, because that's what it really is, isn't it? We tell lies so that the business case sounds good, and if it sounds good enough, you get the funding. So the initiation phase of every project is actually a little bit a work of fiction, only 40% of the time do we have a realistic idea of what are we actually trying to achieve. So the very first governance question is a very important question. What are we trying to achieve? Which strategy is it trying to implement? The second question, once we've worked out that strategic goal is valuable, is to ask ourselves, how much change is required? Because projects have a very high failure rate. And there's no point doing a project if you know you're going to fail. So if we do the project and deliver some kind of output, but people don't change to use the output, there's no point doing it. So I'll give you one example. Suppose we are building cycleways in the inner city. We want to reduce congestion in traffic. So we want people to ride bicycles to get to work. And if we get the people who live in the inner city to ride bicycles to get to work, then the congestion will reduce by a lot. So building the cycleway, not easy, but not that hard. But if we can't get people to change their habits and ride bicycles to get to work, then there's no need to do this project because we won't achieve the strategic goal, which is to reduce congestion. It turns out that only 40% of the time is change considered. We need to ask ourselves, is this a big dotted area or a small dotted area? Large change or small change? Then once we know how much change is involved, there's a third question. And I believe that the best way to understand this is not evaluate, direct, and monitor. But for project governance, we also need something called support. So we need to ask ourselves, who can drive through this change? Who has got enough influence to get people to change their behavior? Who's got enough passion to drive through this change? They strongly believe this has to be done. They put their reputation on the line and they push through the change that's necessary. The stats that I have found show that only 5 to 23% of the time is the sponsor made accountable for the benefits on the right-hand side. So not a great statistic, but that's the best I can find at the moment. Now, the last question before we start a project is, how do we measure success? Because if you don't measure success, you will always end up with on time, on budget being the default measure. So 67% of the time we measure success through on time, on budget. But less than a third of the time, 33%, do we measure something to do with the benefits, such as reduced crime, increased literacy, reduced congestion, improved health. If you're a company, increased profit, increased revenue, reduced cost. We need to have a measure of the project benefits, not project management, which is on time, on budget, but we need to have a measure of the project benefits, of the business benefits. Only 33% of the time is that measured. If you've answered the first 4 questions, the project can start. And in a dream world, you follow PMBOK or you follow Prince2 or you follow the methodology, and step by step, you just do the project. But hardly ever can you follow the project plan exactly. Right now, the reason I'm doing this video is because of COVID. Nobody predicted it, and something unexpected happened. So when something unexpected happens, you have to go, oh, the project can't follow the plan. We need to change the plan. Is that going to affect the benefits? So the 5th question is, do we have a culture so that issues are raised as soon as an emergent event arises? Something unexpected happens. Do people talk about that's going to affect our ability to realize the benefits? Do we have the culture to do that? I've never seen a study to study this. Nobody knows which organizations do this well. There's a very famous paper by De Veer and Lechler. They've said They studied Israeli army projects, and they wanted to compare which projects were more successful, the ones that had really good plans or the ones that had lesser quality plans. And they found neither made any difference. What matters is the ability to change the plan. So their paper is called Plans Are Nothing. Changing plans is everything. So the fifth question is culture. Do we have the right culture to realize the benefits? And then finally, the last question, question 6 is, are we on track to realizing the benefits? Yes or no? It's a monitoring question. If we're not on track to realize the benefits, we need to terminate the project. And I've interviewed a number of board members and I've said, do you have a good way of canceling projects? Because not every project's going to succeed. And not once did a board member say to me, we've got a good way to cancel projects. 13% of the time, people track benefits all the way through to realization. The rest of the time, they don't. So these are the 6 questions. So I'm going to blank the screen for a second and ask you can you remember the 6 questions? Question 1, what are the benefits? Question 2, how much change? Question 3, who should drive through the change? Who should be the sponsor? Question 4, how do we measure the benefits? Question 5, do we have a culture to discuss issues when something unexpected happens? And question 6, are we on track to realizing the benefits? How do we know this works? Well, I've done a study and it was done using a database from one of the big accounting firms. They had been surveying very large change projects for the last 15 to 20 years. And they were international companies all around the world. And there were 110,000 data points. And we matched our questions against those data points. And we tried to find out which question correlated with success. If you ask question 1, does this lead to higher success rates? Does it lead to the benefits being realized? So the thing that you need to notice in this table is the 1 asterisk is significant at the 10% level, 2 asterisks is significant at the 5% level, or 3 asterisks is significant at the 1% level. And we asked this question for the initial stage of a project, the early stage of the project, the middle stage of a project, and the late stage of the project. What we found is that the first 3 questions have some, 10% is not strong correlation, but it is some correlation. If you ask these 2 questions at the beginning of a project, you are much more likely to succeed. If you get the sponsor right at the beginning of a project, you are much more likely to succeed. And then change. The change question is very important in the initial stage, in the early stage, and in the middle stage of a project. And you can see overall, there's a very strong correlation of if question 2 is not answered well, the project will not succeed. And then question 6 is very important during the middle and late stage of the project. Are we on track to realizing the benefits? Did we actually realizing the benefits? Are we measuring the success measures properly? What are we actually trying to achieve? So those questions must be asked in the middle to the end of the project to make sure that those strategic goals are realized. Finally, you can see strong correlation. Not with culture. Do we have the right culture? It doesn't show up in any one particular stage of the project, but overall, there's a strong correlation. If you don't have the right culture to discuss issues, to adapt the project plan and change it, you won't succeed. Same thing with the change question. If you don't manage change through a project, you will not succeed. So let me just ask you a question, and then we'll stop this particular video. How often does the project have a realistic business case? 2/3 of the time? No, that's how often there is a business case. 40% of the time? That's right, 40% of the time, because 27% of the time people lie. 20% of the time, well, that would be sad. Only 20% of the time we know what we're trying to achieve. More like 40%, somewhere between 20 to 40%. So now that's the end of 6Q governance. You may need to listen to the video on additional concepts to understand some of the subtlety, but I suggest you listen to the Dilbert version of the 6Q governance just to get a more humorous idea of how this all fits together. I hope this is interesting and relevant to you.